of those and veterans who have passed. Thank you. And this meeting tonight, as our last several have, are being in pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law under Chapter 30A, Section 18, in the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Bridgewater Town Council will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. There will be no person in attendance permitted. Citizens who wish to tune into the meeting may do so via Facebook Live. I'll entertain a motion to approve our minutes from our previous meeting.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, and all votes, as usual, need to be done by roll call vote.
Excuse me, Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
I think Mr. Columbotus, not here yet.
I don't see him.
Okay. Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Just one announcement that I want to make tonight, and I'll say more about this at the end of the meeting, but I just want to say that on Monday, May 25th, Memorial Day, will be the first time that I can recall in the history of the town of Bridgewater that I'm aware of, is that there will be no official Memorial Day exercises due to what's happening, and particularly under the COVID-19 and the governor's March 15th order imposing the number of people that can gather in one place. I appreciate the effort that people have made in putting the flags around the common and the hometown hero banners that are put up in town. And my understanding there'll be more will be put up on Monday. This weekend. I also understand that there will be some services with a few veterans at the cemeteries on Monday morning. I'm not sure exactly where or what time, but I just want the people of Bridgewater to know that although there'll be no formal Memorial Day exercises with everybody gathering for a march down Broad Street to the Common, that there are things that have been done and some things will be done on Monday. I also want to say that I spoke to Councilor Fitzgibbons, who had a good idea, and I think we all were hoping there would be something we could do Monday. So what I am in asking my fellow councilors, and my fellow councilors only, that we will gather at the Common at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, and we'll have a very brief moment of silence. We'll lay a wreath and then we'll leave. Just so the people know that we're doing something official, but not an official public capacity. So I ask anyone that's available to join me and all of us to join as counselors at the Common. I know it's going to be very, very brief, maybe 3 or 5 minutes, and then we'll go on our day. So I appreciate that. We do not have any proclamations. I will now open it up to citizens open forum. Are there any citizens here tonight that wish to speak during the citizens open forum portion of our meeting? Any citizens? Any citizens wish to speak during the citizens open forum portion of our meeting? I guess I see no hands, so the council clerk is not unmuting anybody, so I will move on into the agenda. Appointments. We have another name has come forward since our last meeting on the Charter Review Commission, which is really, really good. So I'll refer the, I don't know if the town manager, do you have the background information on Darren Boston?
I do not, sir.
You do not. And do you guys have the background information in your packet, I believe? I did have our council clerk make sure that there was no issues with him being an employee or anything on any other committee. And I've been assured that the person is not. So I would entertain a motion to appoint Darren Boston as a member of the Charter Review Committee.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Are there any discussions? Any discussion? Seeing none, that does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
thank you. Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
and Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Okay, thank you very much. I know Mr. Boston is online, so I appreciate that. Hearings, we don't have any hearings this evening. We have license transactions. We have petition P 2020-012, new common victor license doing GBC Food Services LLC, doing business as, I think it's Yummy Sushi. I think that's how you pronounce it. 233 Broad Street, Suite 17, which I think is in the Roach Brothers supermarket, I believe. This is just a license transaction. Is the town manager want to say anything about this, or?
This one's pretty straightforward, Mr. President. This is a granting of a common victualler license. You are correct. It is within the Roach Brothers supermarket, and it has been circulated amongst the department leaders, and everything looks fine from our end.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to grant the license.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
We do not have any presentations this evening. We'll move right into the town manager's report with item A, the Mitchell School update.
Got a number of items this evening, and you are correct. The beginning is the Mitchell School update. Last week, the designers submitted the design development portion of the Mitchell School process to the MSBA. That submission will be reviewed tomorrow in a meeting with the MSBA, and this will also give the MSBA an opportunity to discuss the various stages coming up of design and construction. So I will participate in that, certainly. The work, regardless of that submission, work does continue on the 60% construction documents, which go to the estimators. Those estimates are being produced right now in a reconciliation meeting, which is a meeting where the 2 or 3 different estimating companies sit down and go over areas where there is a wide divergence in estimate to narrow it down to one solid estimate, at least one solid estimate at this 60% design phase. So that 60% as a package goes to the MSBA on June 5th. And as Councillor Fitzgibbons likes to point out and confirm, we are on target, we're on track, also on budget, although the big pieces of the construction have not gone out to bid yet. So we will have a much better idea later in the fall, in November, when those expenses, those costs come back to us. Let's see. So that's still on track for a July 2022 completion. And I think, as you know, the contract for the demolition was signed, and that work will begin imminently. The bid came in way under, almost a little less than half of what was budgeted, which is very good news. We'd like to see that continue. We did, at the request of the school building committee and the communication group, we did send a letter out to abutters all around the Mitchell School, just letting them know what the plan was, what the timing was, and where they could get additional information about all of the project. So that was done. Let's see, I think the next scheduled building committee meeting is Monday, June 1st. And as is the case with all our meetings, that will be a Zoom meeting that will be posted certainly on the town's website and calendar. So you can access the Zoom meeting at that location. Any information, www.bridgewaterschoolproject.com. Again, www.bridgewaterschoolproject.com. That's all I have on the Mitchell School.
Council Fitzgibbons?
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Dutton anticipated my question on the Mitchell timeline, but he didn't on the bidding for demolition. So it came in at roughly half. Is that what I heard, Mr. Dutton?
A little less than half, correct.
So, A, could you explain why there was such a big gap between what was estimated and what was bid? And then B, could you explain what's going to be done with the surplus? Is it going to be just taken off the top of the total cost of the project? Is it going to be allocated elsewhere? How is that savings going to be used?
Good question. The reason it came in, we don't know precisely the reason. My guess is a combination of two things. One is that the concrete slab, they're choosing to leave the portions of the concrete slab in place for staging purposes, and also to prevent any erosion during the period between when the school is torn down and when the new foundation begins. So that slab is probably, demolition of that is probably about $150,000 proposition. So there may have been a significant savings there.
Is that going to be demolished later in the project, so it's a deferred cost, or is it going to be allowed to lay there as part of the new building?
Nope, that's a good question. It will be demolished at a later date, but it will not be removed because it'll be used, the demolished remains will be used for fill on site where fill is necessary. So that's
okay. So great. So we should add 150, and part of the savings is going to the 150 later. Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
And then the other piece.
The overall savings will continue to appear in the project budget until such time as the general bids are opened and then accepted. So at that point, we'll know whether money can actually be saved on the project or whether that savings will have to be plowed into the new building.
So given that I'm a contractor, I know that you just saved half your demolition cost. Why wouldn't I increase my price to get that in my contract?
Because you really want the job, and generally it's going to be the low bidder that gets the job. So you're going to be competing with probably 5 to 10 other general contractors. So you're going to want to make sure you're as competitive as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other questions to the town manager regarding the Mitchell School update? Seeing none, we'll move on to the COVID-19 budget impact.
So COVID, let me just talk just very briefly on COVID-19 and the impacts within town. Today, we are essentially sort of holding steady at 54 total active cases. We've had a little over, I think it's over 89 now released from quarantine. And I think as I reported last meeting, we unfortunately had 2 deaths associated with the COVID-19. The state reports that we are given through the Department of Public Health, for the most part, do not include cases related to the DOC, unless, of course, it's staff, and unless, of course, they actually live in Bridgewater, in which case we would get a report. But generally, those numbers do not include inmates or patients at the treatment center and so forth. So those are separate. But the in-town community cases, I'll call them community cases. Right now, we have 54. We're tracking 54 total active. Also, just to let you know, relative to the coronavirus, we are in the planning process for reopening buildings. I think for many people who looked at the governor's news conference or read the directives about phase 1 reopening, we essentially were not included in that. However, we certainly did get some tidbits of information so that we can begin our own process for reopening. But it is unlikely that we'll see an opening to the public anytime soon. But certainly we're hoping to open up to more employees over the course of the next couple of weeks. In order to do that, we do need to secure a lot of supplies, including new towel dispensers, soap dispensers, and things of that nature. And as you could probably also guess, those are quite challenging to find and procure. So we are working with the fire department, tapping their vendors that they have a relationship with and they use on a regular basis. So I'm optimistic that we will get some supplies in short order. We do also have to engage a company to do daily specialized cleaning. That is an expensive proposition, but you'll certainly, when the time comes, you'll certainly see an incredibly clean building. We have, during the closure that we've been through the last probably 7 or 8 weeks now, we have made it a particular point, everybody, all staff that works in that building made a point to make sure that phone messages are returned or email messages are responded to as quickly as possible. And I think residents, for the most part, have not been looking for any services that we've been able to provide them somehow, either remotely or by appointment and so on. So that part is good. So we really are trying to do our best to make sure that we can meet the expectations of folks remotely. But ultimately, we'll follow the governor's directives and orders in terms of reopening. So, but I do want to just mention, because reopening sort of implies that we've been closed, and closed implies that we've sort of been on vacation or something. And I just want people to understand that's not the case. We have, from day one, we've been working in most cases much longer and harder than we would have if we'd actually been in the building. So the term reopening, at least for me, is sort of a misnomer, and I really think in our terms, reopening means allowing people back into the building. So I do want to make sure people understand that the taxpayers that are paying people should know that we are getting the work done and trying to exceed expectations on that front. In terms of the budget, FY20, the Budget and Finance Committee, I think last week, saw our method of tracking and how carefully we're tracking, literally on a daily basis, our real estate, personal property tax, and utility bill collections. And we're doing that based on what Tony Solmonti laid out as sort of a critical date monitoring schedule, which is a comprehensive look from now till June 30th at the critical dates that we have, the due dates and so forth. At this point, we're virtually certain that we do not need to do any short-term borrowing or tax anticipation notes to cover any bills by the end of FY20. the council, certainly at our recommendation, but the council did adopt the temporary law, which allows payment of taxes normally due May 1st to be extended to June 1st without penalty or interest. Also, the filing of exemptions or deferrals extended to June 1st, and then the penalty and interest that would accrue begin on June 30th for unpaid bills. So you have until June 29th to pay it on June 30th, and then you accrue all the penalty and interest. But that was a bit of a diversion. So anyway, to that end, there are a lot of towns who have adopted that because it was the right thing to do at the time for their taxpayers, but they do tend to be experiencing some cash flow issues. And fortunately, that is not us. I think we're in good shape there. So that is good. We do have obviously continuing challenges, FY20 challenges, filling revenue deficits at both the golf course and possibly the transfer station. I think the golf is a bit self-evident since their play has been prohibited up until last week. Fortunately, we've had a pretty good turnout and really good processes in place up there. And kudos to the golf folks for getting those in place. The transfer station revenues that's a very difficult business because of the fluctuations. But in good years, you're able to sell your recyclables and you actually have a revenue stream from that. And in bad years like this, you actually have to pay to get rid of your recyclables. So we're in those bad years. So we're going to have to be very attentive to that. But those transfers to fill those deficits will come to you at the next council meeting, and that'll give us enough time it'll give us more time to try to narrow down those deficits and be as precise with the numbers as we can possibly be. So that's what I have for 2020. If anybody has a question on 2020.
2020, Councilor Fitzgibbons.
Yeah, just to follow up on the transfer station, are we sure where our pricing is correct for the use of the transfer station these days? Is that something that you need to look at? And then how do you respond to good times versus bad times, as you were talking about, where some years you make a profit and some years you don't? Is there a mechanism within the transfer station to retain earnings to say, all right, we're making some money this year, let's hold it and use it when we need it in a down year? That's
a very good point. There is that mechanism, and when we do have good years, we are able to fund similar to any of the other enterprise funds. Certainly water and sewer. So there are mechanisms where you can retain those earnings and then carry them over to offset the bad years. But our transfer station has never spun off enough, real enough of a critical mass to be able to really set aside something for that purpose. The question about are there things we could do? Are we priced correctly? We did do a review of pricing a little less than a year ago and adjusted some of those prices to bring them more in line with others. We also have tried to actually market the transfer station a little bit more and encourage people to use it. It's a great resource. But at this point, given the order of magnitude of the issues that we've got going on, that we'll probably look at a stopgap measure for next fiscal year, just to try to boost those revenues a little bit more to make sure that they're hopefully at break even, and if they have to run a deficit, that deficit is as low as possible. But we have been having some pretty extensive conversations about what we could do to make that a more break-even proposition in the long term.
More break-even isn't good enough for an enterprise fund, in my opinion. It needs to be break-even or better. I understand, we've had challenges with the golf course, and we've had to meet those. Not good, but we've had to meet them. And, you know, we've now paid off the bond for the golf course. We've now, you know, we're moving on to the clubhouse, et cetera, to pay. And we've been dealt this COVID and loss of rounds. Get that. I'd like to get a better sense of the underlying structural problem at the transfer station that's causing deficits to occur. Is it lack of use? Are we're priced correctly compared to adjoining towns? We just don't get enough use, you know, et cetera, so that, you know, we understand when you suggest an action that, okay, here's the cause, here's the action we're taking, here's how we expect it to affect the cause and change it so that it's no longer a cause of causing deficits. Thanks.
Point well taken.
And I think that the transfer station is a great asset to this community. I think the price is right. I think more people in this town should take advantage of it. And it's a great service for the taxpayers of this town. Moving on, any other questions regarding COVID-19 and budget impact? Mike, I have a couple questions. On the COVID-19 part of it, have you applied for any reimbursement for anything yet regarding the COVID-19, and have we received any monies?
Short answer is no. We're waiting for Plymouth County to send us. They promised this week that they would be sending out a, you know, what forms they're going to be using so that we actually can apply for reimbursement on our accrued COVID expenses. We have not seen that yet, but as soon as we get that, we'll be racing to the county office, so to speak.
So some towns have already gotten some indications as to approximately how much CARES money they are going to get. Have we looked into that yet? And is that all relying on Plymouth County's plan or what? And
good question. The county has taken about I'll call it $90 million. It's a hair more than that, but $90 million, and they've set aside 25% of that money and allocated it, not distributed it, but allocated it to all of the member cities and towns. You know, all the cities and towns within Plymouth County. So our allocation is a little more than $1.2 million. And that is the money that we will begin to draw off of when we begin to submit our reimbursement requests. I think it was, well, may be on the agenda later, but I might as well talk about it a little bit now. The plan, which is a fine plan, so 25% of it they want to make sure, you know, was there in the respective buckets for all of our purposes, so that each of the towns can draw off of their bucket. The challenge that Bridgewater faces, which I've mentioned before, is that a lot of our added expense and our overtime and our equipment purchases have gone towards servicing state facilities. So in particular, the DOC, I have to, you know, can't say that BSU has been a big piece of that at all. They haven't, but certainly the Department of Correction has been, and we service the Department of Correction, and that's fine. But we're concerned that if the county's policy is that they're not going to offset any expenses incurred by state agencies, we want to make sure that we're not in limbo. Now, my conversation with the county the end of last week, I was assured that that wouldn't be the case, that you know, we would be able to draw off our $1.2 million bucket for those expenses. My ancillary concern was that the allocation was based on population. So that $1.2 million is based upon a population from our last census, and that census may or may not, well, probably didn't, certainly didn't include all of the inmates or patients found down at the DOC complex. Similar to BSU, our census figures don't include all of the students that we actually have a responsibility to service. So I expressed that. I was assured that there, in future allocations, there were some adjustments could be made to accommodate that. So we'll definitely be continuing to make phone calls and emails and letters to make sure that that our concerns are heard. The other concern, unrelated to the state facilities, is the Bridgewater Raynham district. So as you know, Bridgewater is in Plymouth, obviously. Raynham is not in Plymouth. So Raynham's BR's application for reimbursements for the expenses that they've incurred probably will have to go to two places. It'll have to go to the state for Raynham's portion, and then have to go to Plymouth County for Bridgewater's portion. And that's, I don't think that was ever contemplated, quite frankly, in when Plymouth County was deciding to go the route that they did. Regardless, I was assured that that was another variable that would be accounted for on our behalf. But again, we'll be very careful about that. About the reimbursement requests and making sure we track exactly where the dollars should be allocated.
Right, and I know we're the budget that you submitted today, and it's going to go into committee later on, but one of the things that I'll probably ask of you during the budget deliberations, particularly when it's in committee, is throughout the budget that you submitted, Michael, you reference in pretty much every department to address the new exigencies, I believe is the word. I had to look that one up when I saw that one. I never heard. Anyway, if our fiscal 21 budget is being built on costs associated with a different way that the town will have to operate because of COVID-19, I would assume that those costs could be part of the CARES Act, and we can assume that revenue, if you will, at some point in fiscal 21. I'm just bringing it up now because I think it's important that we don't lose sight that there will be some revenue coming to the town of Bridgewater for this COVID-19 pandemic that we've had to incur. Tim? Councilor Fitzgibbons? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Dutton, you brought up about the regional school district and how they're going to have to seek funding for reimbursement. I'd like to make sure that we see how much the district gets from the state for the Raynham portion of whatever expenses there are, and what they get from Plymouth County for whatever the extent of Bridgewater's portion is. Just to understand if both entities who are allocating funding are doing it in a similar and reasonable manner around those things, because that could be a good tell for us as a town as well. I'd also just add, we are a member of another regional school district, Bristol Plymouth, much obviously less students from Bridgewater in there, but from Bristol and Plymouth, the counties that will have to go through the same thing. So maybe talk to them as well. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions to the town manager regarding COVID-19 and budget impact? I mean, you've all got the copy of the FY21 budget, so we'll be talking about that probably in a few weeks. It'll be in committee. CARES Act grant funding, was that part of your?
I sort of covered that one.
Okay.
But let's, I think I got all the points that yep.
President Gallagher, can I ask a question, please?
Sure. Counselor George?
Through you to the town manager. So I know that there was an announcement that I was waiting for this because I didn't know where it would fall. Announcement that CVS in Bridgewater is going to be a testing facility. I know there's public concern, and rightfully so. Have you explored, or can you explore, any avenues to ensure public safety that will be reimbursed directly by the state under either the CARES Act or COVID-19? I would highly expect that they would be willing to help offset some of the public safety concerns for the town without us going through all the hoops, considering I don't believe we had any input whatsoever in hosting a COVID testing site. Love your
No.
thoughts on that.
No, Councilor George brings up a really good point, which I had not included in my report, but I certainly will talk a little bit about. Department of Public Health and the governor's office made an announcement, and I can't remember the days. Days all sort of blend into one at this point, but made an announcement that CVS and the state had developed a testing program, and that Bridgewater, not all of the CVS locations would be providing testing services, but Bridgewater was one of them that would be. Our health agent had absolutely no prior knowledge or was not given a heads up, nor was the police department or the fire department for that matter. And it certainly, it certainly is a concern. So far, it hasn't appeared to cause any kind of public safety issue, but the notion that you're limiting the number of testing sites and then just sort of unilaterally saying it's in Bridgewater without informing Bridgewater was a little bit of a difficult pill to swallow. But to your question about offsetting any expenses to that, and I think President Gallagher's point as well about making sure that we account for everything that can possibly be an expense to us related to COVID. We are buckling down and doing that every day with every single invoice we pay, with every single commitment that we make. We're making sure that we allocate it and segregate it so that that's and we can articulate the reason that we're incurring that expense. So we are tracking that very carefully. We have let our feelings be known about sort of being blindsided. This is the second time that's happened in the last 8 weeks or so, and I don't assign any nefarious motives to it. I just think it just sort of it gets lost in the mix when the state is dealing with the statewide issues. But I think they heard us loud and clear in our objection.
So are there any measures that need to be taken for public safety?
So far, we have not found that we need to take any additional measures for public safety. Certainly, if either of the fire chief or the police chief or the health agent let me know that there are things that we have to do, we immediately will account for those hours, those man hours, those equipment, the equipment by how many hours they were dedicated to that. So, but as of yet, we have not seen any issues that impact us yet.
So does the health agent feel that CVS is properly prepared to do the testing since he's been blindsided?
Well, I will ask, but I on a call this morning, he did not indicate that there was any issue with the CVS. Obviously, the CVSs that have been designated are ones that CVS Corporation is prepared for testing. But there's a difference between what they prepare internally for testing and how we have to prepare for the impact of the town of their testing. So we'll carefully track that. But so far, we haven't seen any adverse consequence.
I'll say personally, and I've heard this from other people as well, understanding that having a testing facility smack dab in the middle of town is not really conducive to people's level of, I'll say, safety and the concern is rightfully so. So I'd like to see at least more communicated about that. And instead of waiting to see what happens, potentially having some proactive measures. And again, with the state supporting it 110%, because now we have another responsibility put on our shoulders without us having any input or notification whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Good point.
Anything, Council Lindy? I see your
Yes,
hand up.
I just want to echo what Councilor George just said, but it's my understanding that there's really no physical separation between people going out the door and people being tested. There is only one entrance in to that CVS, and a few people expressed concerns about it. I think we should be more proactive as well. And I'm not questioning what the health agent does, but I just think, better safe than sorry.
I'll find out
Councilor
more,
Sue?
and particularly tomorrow morning, I'll get all the details on their protocols.
Thank you.
Councilor Souza, did you have a question?
Yes, I was just wondering, is it going to be a drive-by where you don't get out of your vehicle, you come up to a tent, or they're going to have to walk into the CVS? Which is it?
That, Counselor, I don't know. My understanding was that it was going to be a drive-by, as all the rest of them are, where you don't get out of your car. But I will check on the protocols first thing in the morning.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's a good topic. Item D, update. We have 4 updates put on by Councilor Columbotus of the building maintenance position. Is he online? I don't see him. I don't see his name. I have no phone numbers either. So anyway, I guess it's on the
I
agenda.
don't believe he's here.
All right. It's on the agenda, so I think we can still talk about it, other than if you want to give a brief update. I don't know what his specific questions were, but if any my colleagues have questions regarding it, feel free to ask.
Well, I can give you an update on, and I think I know where Councilors, was asking. So the building maintenance position, which we had actually built into the 2020's budget, two positions. That facilities director position was advertised and obviously budgeted, as I mentioned. We did interview several people who had some experience in the field, and we did offer the position to one of the qualified experienced candidates. Unfortunately, that candidate's company had made a counteroffer that was way beyond our match. Otherwise, we didn't have any qualified applicants. So in a number of areas right across town, we've had real challenges in what was the hiring environment 3 months ago. We've had real challenges trying to find qualified applicants. And I think everybody's been in that same boat. But right now, for a lot of the building projects that we've got going on, we are looking for independent contractor services instead of an employee, because we don't want to just hire anybody to fill the seat. We want to make sure that we get the right person for that right job that's right for Bridgewater. So we do obviously have severe constraints on the 21 budget. And we have at least temporarily eliminated the funding for that position. But I do think we'll be, if we have to limp along with how we've done it, we'll be okay. We do have, a lot of our department leaders who have responsibility for the buildings have really given us, a clear idea of the type of expertise we need and the education and the experience. So we will continue to refine the job description, and we will do our best to be able to fund it. Right now, we do pay a small stipend to another employee who is covering the basics for us, just arranging, you know, a lot of those facilities, things that have to be done either on a year-to-year basis or the one-time thing. So he's done a good job so far. But we'll continue to seek a qualified candidate, and we'll you know, obviously continue to seek the funding where we can. So I think next year we'll have a much better opportunity in the hiring front if my suspicions are correct. So that's really where we stand with that position.
Anybody have, Council Fitzgibbons?
Yeah, just a quick question, Mr. Dutton, and really it's more of a philosophical question for you as to when you would create a town employee position versus contracting out services, and could you articulate that? Not right now. I'm just asking in the future on any particular position. Articulate why this ought to be a town employee position as opposed to a contracted out service.
I'll give you our whole thought process. You know, obviously not right now, but very generally, we start anytime a position becomes open, which is not the case with this one, but anytime a position comes open, we analyze it for the work that position was doing, for the work that hasn't been able to be done, and we look for ways to alter the position to fit the town's needs before we go back out and look for another body or another person. In terms of when is it good to have an independent contractor, when's it good to have an employee, when we need that 40-hour expertise on a regular basis, and we can know with certainty that that 40-hour position is going to be doing a 60-hour-a-week job, that's when we are pretty certain that we need an employee long-term. If we look at the work product that has to get done, and we think, well, it's really only a 20-hour-a-week job, and it really the bulk of it is only going to last for a couple of years, then we obviously would look for an independent contractor. But there's a lot that I'm making it very simple, but there's an awful lot more that actually goes into that, including, you know, insurances, you know, liabilities, you know, risk avoidance, risk assessments, and all that. But very generally, that gives you an idea of what our thought process is.
Right. I just wanted folks to understand that we aren't running into hiring any positions willy-nilly saying, oh, yes, this would be a great person to have as a town employee without a thought process as you described behind it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For my opinion on that is for at least 4 budget cycles, we have had this position in the budget. And we were always told that this would be filled for reasons justified or not justified by the town manager has never been filled. Now we're going to go into a budget cycle where this will probably be taken out. There have been many opportunities throughout the 3 years to fill the position, which I think, as I have explained many times, is needed. We are a town of 27,000 people. We are a town with a $60 million budget. And remember, we share a school, so we don't have a full school budget in that 60 million, just our piece. I don't know of any other town, even close to our size, that does not have some sort of maintenance staff. The golf course has maintenance staff to help with repairs of their equipment, not subcontractors. So I think that we did run into an incident about a year ago where there was a major problem with the academy building. Not saying that a maintenance person would have been able to fix it, but I think a on-duty maintenance person could have alleviated some of the damage that was done and stopped the bleeding, if you will, before an expert, someone with more technical capabilities came in to fix it. So to not have at least a general laborer or general repairman in our town where we have so many buildings, I think we're just fooling ourselves because we know the history of this town is that we have not taken care of our buildings. And we're, because of lack of maintenance. And here has been a good opportunity to do that. And we'll talk about this more when we get to the budget process, because it's going to be taken out. And I'm not saying I'm against it being taken out, because if we're not going to fill it, then it should be taken out, particularly in what we're facing. But there should be a maintenance staff in this town. There's at least one person to be able to handle some of the general maintenance, light construction, just to do things. And it would save us money, I think. All right, can I move on? Anybody else? Okay, Town Hall on National Register of Historic Places.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that we have done. I think I reported to the council probably 6 months ago that over the winter we would be collecting a lot of the data and the research that we need to do before the consultant can do its work. So Jennifer Burke, our Community and Economic Development Director, has done that, and she has that materials prepared. We did reach out to MHC to make sure that we had the materials we needed for their purposes. However, in conversations with the consultants that have been engaged to do the feasibility on the town hall building itself, who have a lot of experience with historic structures, they suggested that we not plow ahead immediately, because they wanted the opportunity to look at sort of the overview of what putting the building on the register really means, because they had some concern that putting it on the register might limit whatever the feasibility study was going to recommend. So fortunately, I think we've got a very good group of folks who are on the feasibility study committee for the old town hall. They sort of bridge as well the historic commission and the CPC and the cultural council. So that is essentially where that is right now. So we are on a temporary hold pending information from the consultants and some advice from the consultants that we actually do have engaged looking at the feasibility of use of the old town hall. So that's where that one stands at this point.
Any questions regarding the town hall on the historic places? Councilor Lindy?
No, I didn't have a question. Sorry.
Okay. Councilor Columbotus is online. I see him.
I have arrived, sorry.
So go ahead.
Mr. Detler, it's my understanding that the inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places really doesn't bring with it any restrictions of the interior use of the buildings. What would it preclude us from doing? What inclusion on the register?
I don't know the answer to that, Counselor, but I'm just relaying what Jennifer Burke's been told by the consultants that are looking at it currently, both the arts consultant and the architect. So I can certainly find out, see what is precluded by that, but I don't, honestly, I think I've said before, we've had a challenge trying to find a consultant that could do this for us, and actually Louise Stevens, the consultant on the project, does have some experience with historic buildings in Massachusetts. So possibly as part of this process, in conjunction with the feasibility of the building, it's also a good opportunity to find the expertise needed to actually get it into the register.
Right. Fold that in. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
And save a little bit of money.
Right.
Okay, we'll move on to Central Fire Station relocation.
The Central Station, I think, as the council knows, we went out to bid. We went out to seek an RFQ on the feasibility phase of the new fire station. We did have about 7 responses, I believe, and the fire station committee reviewed those submissions, selected 3 finalists for interview. They then conducted the interviews and took those 3 and ranked them in order of preference. And quite interestingly, that ranking, I believe, I defer to Councilor Rushton, who was there, but I think that ranking was unanimous. So there was a consensus among the group that one, clearly there was a first place, there was a second and a third place. So that gives me the order in which I need to negotiate regarding a fee and the detailed scope of services. And I'm midway through that process with the number 1 candidate, which has gone pretty well so far. So I think we're going to reach an agreement there. The funding for the feasibility phase is part of the capital order that the council has, or finance committee is currently reviewing. So I expect to be able to sign the consultant contract literally within a few days of the council's approval of those capital funds. And originally we had asked for the feasibility phase, an accelerated feasibility phase to take about 90 days. And at this point, I think given what we can get from this particular consultant, brings us a little bit further than we had anticipated that we could get. But the flip side is, I think we'll take about 5 months instead of 3 months to get to where we get to be further than where we originally anticipated. So that's good news. And I think we'll be able to work around the balance of the COVID crisis. And I think he'll be able to schedule the whole slew of meetings that he needs to do around that too. So that's good news. So that's where we are on that one. That seems to be progressing fairly well.
Councilor Columbotus?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dutton, so there's a committee, who's an ad hoc committee that's looking into the relocation, right? Is that right?
Correct.
Could you do me a favor and perhaps send minutes for the past few meetings along to the council? And is there a site? Have they chosen a priority site?
No.
Relocation?
Nope. That'll be part of the be part of the feasibility phase, and that's one of the things that kind of differentiated this architectural firm from some of the others. They really showed some that they were quite adept in being able to guide a town through site selection process.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else questions regarding the Central Fire Station relocation? It seems like the process is moving along and we'll get there. Next is comprehensive zoning update.
The comprehensive zoning update. So the public hearing, as you recall, this was sent. Well, let me back up. The zoning update is designed to be, we're calling it a recodification, the zoning recodification. It was designed to do a number of things, but all fairly routine and fairly benign things. Originally designed to take our current zoning bylaws, convert them to ordinances. It was designed to reformat the zoning into a logical, sequential order, and it was designed to tackle some of the conflicts, some of the many conflicts occurring within the zoning bylaws. And finally, it was also designed to update based on changes in the law, based upon many land court and superior court decisions. It was designed to update the book of zoning so that it would be solid, defensible, easy to understand, and logical. So that was the intent of this phase of the zoning recodification. Council got that. It's gone to the planning board for hearing. That hearing is still open. I believe it wraps up this week. And then the planning board's intent is to ask residents to provide one final round of any new concerns that it has at their meeting this week. And then at their June 3rd meeting, Mark Bobrowski, who is the attorney that was engaged to walk the bylaws through this process, can address any of those remaining concerns from the public. So I expect that the planning board will return it with some recommendations and some amendment suggestions back to the council after that June 3rd meeting. That's where that one stands.
Any questions regarding the zoning update? I'm sure there'll be more of that once it comes out of committee. Councilor Columbotus?
Yeah, just quickly, Mr. Dutton, have you had any success in getting the red line version of that comprehensive of the zoning ordinances?
The planning office is working on that. We're going to do an entire breakdown of what the old, the old bylaw, where the similar provisions are in the new ordinance, and then a short description of what, if anything, has changed. So, so I think the more information we can get out there, the better. I think there's been a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about what the intent was here and what the objective is. The objective is not to make policy changes. The objective is not to, make unilateral changes without going through a more robust process. In fact, that's precisely why we engaged the master plan committee, so that by the end of that process, we'll have a roadmap about which provisions of zoning actually do need more comprehensive changes, and then we can tackle those in a more logical and sequential manner as well. So, but that is forthcoming. Council will get that whole breakdown certainly before you have your public hearing.
Yeah, certainly. Citizens get nervous about zoning changes, and so I think the more transparency and information we can have that and clarity, it's just a better process for everybody. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, just remember, everybody, that if you have anything that you would like on the agenda for the town manager to address, to let them know now, or sometime between now and before the agenda is put out for our next meeting, which is June 2nd, to let Ann know that you would like a certain topic discussed by the town manager. We'll move on to discussion. Under J, discussions, we have a follow-up, a town follow-up on citizens' comments process. We had a discussion on this at the last meeting on how we would address citizens that come forward at the citizens open forum or citizens comments and addressing them. Tim, did you want to elaborate any more on that?
I can try. I thought I did it at the last meeting. But basically, when we hear public comments, citizens' comments, we hear certain things that, sometimes are very specific. Like, I'm really concerned about this in my neighborhood. And I expect in the course of business, the town manager hears that and addresses it somehow, either via an email or speaking to the person after the meeting and saying, hey, get in touch with me, or however it works. And those things can be addressed as they are. Sometimes there are more larger policy questions that come up, and why is the town going in this direction? Now, let's just go through a regular meeting and say this comes up at the beginning of the agenda. Well, it's not on the agenda for town manager comments or discussion because it hasn't on there before, and that would be an open meeting law violation to even address it. It violates our rules, etc. I get all that. Similarly, we don't necessarily engage with the public during those discussions. But I feel like at some point, when it's a larger issue, town manager ought to come back in his town manager and say, okay, I had this question from 2 weeks ago, and, you know, it was why, you know, perhaps it was someone who came up and said, why would you ever hire somebody to be a town building maintenance guy when you can just contract it out? You know, I'm just making it up. I'm not arguing for or against it. But he gave an answer to me. But if I didn't ask the question and somebody asked it earlier in the meeting and there was never any follow-up, well, how does that person feel? They feel like they've been ignored. And they feel like they're not getting the satisfaction of coming up and saying, hey, I have a legitimate question that maybe a lot of people in the town have. Now, could we bring it up to the town manager and say, put it on your report? Yeah, we could. But I'd look to him to hear things from that, the citizens' comments portion and say, you know, I want to address this, this, and this. Clear it with you, obviously, or whoever the president is. This is what's going to be on the agenda, and et cetera. But at least let's try to start closing loops on some of these things. That's kind of what I was asking for. I'm open to the process. I'd love to hear what everyone wants to say, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Anybody else have any comments about that? Okay, we'll just see as things come up. We'll see how they develop. The next item is.
Well, then I'd just like to ask Mr. Dutton is that something you could start doing on your own without direction from the council, or do you need direction from the council on that?
No, I think I've sort of begun with your council clerk and the town attorney to sort of set up a process that we can use that ensures that we capture everything. And honestly, some of that includes counselors. We'll make sure that you know, if it's a general question about town, then fine, we can deal with that. But certainly if we know where a resident lives and there's something impacting the resident in that location of town, in that district precinct, then we'll incorporate the district counselor in order to begin to address that. So, but I think we have a process that'll work.
Well, and you know, Mr. Dutton, being the precinct 2 counselor, we have, I'm not going to mention the area, but we have an area that has very significant concerns about water levels in the neighborhood and how it affects the roadways there. If someone comes up from that neighborhood to address it, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to speak about it at the next council meeting. I'd expect you to address it with those residents and with the DPW, et cetera. However, if someone comes up and says, I don't understand why you have this thing in the budget and it's a town-wide issue, I'd just like to see the closure come in that way. So I don't want necessarily every issue to be vetted and brought back to the council, but those that are town-wide impacts and that, you know, you could reasonably expect somebody would say, hey, that is a good point. I live over here in District 3, but he's coming from District 1 and he's thinking the same thing I am. Mm-hmm. So that's the type of thing I'd look for.
Okay. Councilor Columbotus, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think there are certainly things that the town manager can, you know, that everyone can understand are pressing and worthy of more attention. But I think it's also, the councilors still have a role. If there is something that we particularly think, we hear something from a constituent, we can always emphasize, yes, in our personal preference or even collective preference that should be a particular focus of attention. I don't think the council needs to step back altogether. I mean, I think we have some role in directing the town manager. That's not to say he doesn't have initiative on his own.
Right. Right. Okay, anybody else? Okay, next item is Memorial Building Preservation Restriction Considerations and Historical Commission Comments. Councilor Columbotus, you put this on for discussion?
Yes, I'm just, I guess thought it would be useful if we all had some clarity as to the plans for the memorial building. Apparently there's been some resistance from some boards and committees in town about the use of that building and the our inability to really make it more of a public space for memorial or some sort of library use. And so I'm just wondering what the current plan is, if the comments from the Historical Commission, for example, have been internalized into the process of deciding where we go forward. And one kind of ancillary question to that is that apparently the State Historical Commission has a preservation restriction on the building. So I'm wondering how that affects the development of the plans as they've existed so far and how that might affect how we change them.
Yeah.
So I can address that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, at the moment, my understanding is based on what the town managers presented to us before is that I think it's the water and sewer department are in the need of some space. And that right now there's accommodations being made to move their offices into the memorial building. Now, whether that's long forever or a short-term plan, I'm not sure, but that's what's going on there. Now, there were some issues regarding bathrooms being in the middle of the floor or something like that. But I also know in the capital, I believe in the capital budget, there's an awful lot of money, Let me repeat that, an awful lot of money being set aside from our taxpayers' money and the CPC, which is taxpayers' money too, to fix that building up and bring it to code. So there's a lot going on with that building. How it, when all is said and done, who's actually in there, what the use is, I'm not sure, but I'll defer to the town manager on that.
Mr. President, I think Councilor Columbotus is correct. I think there's been a little bit of confusion around the process. The CPC, we're requesting CPC funds to do work on the building, primarily make it accessible, properly accessible. It's not currently properly accessible. Make the lower level usable, and make the upper level right now tentatively office space for, as you pointed out, water and sewer. So the long-term use of the building is not really, I think, the question at this point. Would it be great to have a museum or have lots of display space in Bridgewater? Absolutely, it would be. I would be the first one to be a proponent of that. Unfortunately, that's just not at this point. That's not something that's doable, and I certainly don't say that that's not something we can't do in the future. But right now, that's not doable. We do have a pressing need to get space for water and sewer, so that is tentatively the use of the building. But more importantly, we have a little bit shy of $700,000 that we've set aside for repairs on that building when we did the academy building. And as our finance director said a number of times, we have to get that money used, or it's going to be it'll go back. So we have the chance, we have the money, that money in hand. So we're just trying to get it used. Going back to Councilor Columbotus's point about the preservation restriction, there is a preservation restriction on that building, both the inside and the outside. What the restriction refers to as major alterations to the building require MHC, Mass Historic Commission approval. We will, once we know we have the funding and we know that we can proceed with the plans, at that point, we then go to the Mass Historic with schematic design and get them to approve. If you look at the restriction, it's fairly straightforward. It allows minor alterations, painting, just regular, non-significant painting as a minor alteration. Any major stripping of decorative features or so forth requires MHC approval. Windows and doors, certainly our intent is to do the windows properly, very similar to what we had done with the Academy building, to preserve those windows, but some of that actually would be considered minor alterations under the MHC restriction. Although if we add storm windows, then that's a major. You know, absolutely, there is a process. We are aware of it at this point. There are things that we actually have done to that building that we know we're going to have to correct because they weren't done properly in years past. So under the guidelines, so we know the path that we're going to have to walk down. But the first step is to make sure that we know exactly what kind of funding we've got to go into that building before we plow ahead with the plans. So I guess that's the short answer.
Any other questions? Do you guys have any discussion concerns about the building? Councilor Columbotus?
Thank you. Mr. Dutton, a member of the local historical commission sent an email to both me and I think Councilor Souza, in which he questioned the necessity of, I guess there are 3 bathrooms on the first floor in the current plan?
No, there are 2 bathrooms on the main level, which would be required, and then there we may be able to do 1 on the lower level, but right now there are 2 on the main level as required.
Right. Yeah. This commission member was wondering if expressed a concern that we hadn't entertained all possibilities for accommodating bathrooms on that first floor, and he suggested that perhaps they could be they could remain on the basement level with the inclusion of an elevator. Is that something that the architect looked at?
The short answer is yes. I think the long-term, you know, sort of integrity of the building and the long-term historic value to the exterior, and the long-term expense of having an elevator or chairlift is really offset by doing the capital, you know, the right kind of job up front with the capital, you know, expense at the building stage. So we did have him look at that. Having a stair lift or a chairlift rather, right now is about a $4,000 proposition a year, and that's for something that is exposed to the elements. That probably is not the right way to go. It also, you know, if you're going to put bathrooms, limit bathrooms to the lower level the way it is now, you'd have to do some sort of interior chairlift that could bring people down below. And I have to double check with the architect and the access people, but I think right now you know, the better possibility, if there's a real desire to limit the number of bathrooms on the what I'll call the working level, the main level, would be to seek a waiver from the Architectural Access Board. And quite honestly, I don't know if that's achievable based on what I know today. But I think that would be the better option. I think trying to eliminate bathrooms on that main level is really not wise or feasible or cost effective in the long run.
Go ahead.
But just one more thing. So there's not an ad hoc building committee kind of shepherding this project. Is this just coming out of the development office?
Yeah, we have, correct. We have not put a committee together for this one because honestly, at the time, we anticipated that there would be no, you know, major alterations other than handicapped access in the bathrooms. And, you know, I'm happy that, so we're under a bit of a time crunch here by the end of the fiscal year, but certainly if you know, we are in the concept stage now, you know, if we get the funding and if we continue on to schematic design phase, I'm happy to put together a committee that can guide some of those decisions. And I know the Historic Commission is probably very eager to be part of that. I know the Disabilities Commission would be happy to be part of that. And they're probably members of the Historic District Commission who I could get to sit in as part of that too. What we had done from the get-go is to try to get representatives from, or whole committees together, and we showed them the concept plans. You know, we've tried to keep them up to speed as we go along, and people seem to appreciate that approach up until, you know, the last few months where for some reason that you know, there were concerns raised about the concept design. So, but as I say, I'm happy to put together a committee if that will end up with a better result.
Right. I mean, we just had tremendous success with you know, restoring the Academy building, and I think there's a great degree of confidence in how that was administered. And I would just hate for a project to kind of be, you know, end up badly without people feeling, you know, that there's been an open process and that we looked at all possibilities. So I look forward to that. So perhaps I'll just be in touch with you to try to kind of see where things at along the way.
That'd be perfect.
Thank you.
Councilor Souza, you had your hand up?
Yes, I did. As Councilman Colabota said, I had contact with a number of people concerning that building. And one of the real things that they're concerned about is they have a number of items that they want to display pertaining to military, and it should be in the memorial building. But their concern is once those offices are put in the rear of the building and the front door is open and nobody can see who's coming and going, their items are going to walk away as some have already done in the past. Their question is, why? We don't know what we're going to do with the old town hall. We talk about retail, they talk about office space, they talk about renting all this out for all these other different purposes. Why can't the water and sewer department go in that building and do this building upright as a nice memorial and get all those things that people have in storage and everything else and put it in there and know that it's secure? That's the conversations that I've been having with people. They're talking to me about those kinds of things. I've talked to Mr. Dutton about it. You see Mr. Colabotis? I don't know where it's going.
Councilor Chase, did you have your hand up?
No,
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Lindy, you moved to the other side. Councilor Lindy. You're muted. Unmute yourself.
You, sorry about that. There we go. Sorry about that. So anyway, I'm through the council president to the town manager. You said there's time constraints. Is that, when does the money have to be spent specifically, and is what we're going to be doing for those offices permanent?
Two questions. One is we need to be substantially underway with the planning process by the end of the fiscal year. So that's the constraint on the funding side. Nothing we do in the building, including the placement of offices, is permanent, and that's you know, probably not answering the question that you're specifically asking. But nothing, according to our historical standards, nothing that we are incorporating into that building is permanent.
Thank you.
So no, but short term, for the foreseeable future, we need to house those folks in an appropriate place. So for the short term, correct, it would be.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. No committee reports. Legislation for action. We have ordinance FY 20-008, general ordinance to rescind ordinance D 2012-00 for administration and fiduciary oversight of the budget, reference to ambulance receipts. At their meeting held on February 25th, 2020, The Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. The Finance Committee voted to recommend approval at their meeting held on 4/28/20. This measure was sent to advertising at our last meeting and has been duly advertised in the Enterprise and on the town's website, therefore may be finally considered this evening.
Motion to approve.
Second.
There's a motion to approve and a second. Any discussions? Councilor Fitzgibbons?
I'd just like to ask the town manager to explain the net effect of this and what we're doing, what we're rescinding, and what it allows the town to do moving forward.
The original ordinance was adopted back in 2012, and it was really an attempt to create an ambulance reserve, but through which receipts that came in from insurance, from Medicare, from Medicaid, were set aside to fund the ambulance business. There was a cap of $1 million, and that could be transferred out of what?
Can I interrupt, Mr. Nutton?
Sure.
So the ambulance receipts fund was set up years and years ago, and it was designed to fund the operations of the ambulance and all of the manpower, et cetera, that was dealing with the ambulance. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so when the money from that ambulance receipts fund exceeded the cost of running the ambulance, it went into ambulance receipts reserved, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there's ambulance receipts reserved, and that was generally used for upgrading equipment in the ambulance space. I don't know who I'm getting feedback from, but that's okay. I'll keep going. That was generally used to upgrade ambulances and pay for new ambulances, et cetera, right?
Correct.
Okay, so one of the things that lately had been done, and by lately I mean within the last 20 years, is essentially using ambulance receipts to pay for essentially a lot of the operation of the fire department, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And again, if there were ambulance receipts reserved left over, it would go into that. But those were restricted to running the ambulance service. And so as we're looking at this, what we're looking at, we came into when the council started. Obviously, everyone remembers, I hope everyone remembers, because if we don't, we're going to be in trouble, how dire the town's fiscal situation was, and looking under every seat cushion for every penny and dime. And we would actually, as a town, overspend what we thought were ambulance receipts just to be able to keep the fire department running at a certain level, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So the order, as it was initially written, was essentially to say, whoa, stop doing that, that in fact only allow $1 million to even flow into your budget. And other than that, everything else will flow back to ambulance receipts reserved or whatever, however it flowed back, right?
Correct.
So now what we're doing is we're rescinding that order, saying just keep $1 million. Now, does that mean, for example, that we're going to just start spending willy-nilly without consideration of how much money is coming into the fund every year?
No.
No. So what we have now is a fiscal process that Mr. Salmonti has outlined and gone through that really allows us to say, okay, here's what we can expect. And then as a council, we can say, yes, we can reserve these receipts. This is how much we can afford to put toward the fire department. But when every year for the last at least 3 or 4, maybe longer years, we've always voted to override this $1 million anyway. So we're really, what we're doing is removing the restriction that we've always removed the last 3, 4, 5 years to what our prudent fiscal process has brought us to, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
It's also important to note that in the ordinance, under the explanation is because of the scenarios that Council Fitzgibbons brought up, is that the town auditor notes in the audit report that although we have this order in place, is that we always go out of the order to appropriate more money. So he said it wasn't created properly if we're not sticking to it. So, and with better budget practices in place regarding budget resolutions and so forth, that this ordinance isn't necessary based on the budget ordinance that we have and the finance director and town manager, that the ordinance should be rescinded. So that's pretty much the explanation as to why it needs to be rescinded. So
Correct.
there is a motion and there is a second. Is there any further discussion on this? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Okay, we're now acting under order FY 20053, the transfer order employee contractual buyouts. At the meeting held on May 11th, 2020, the Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval. The Budget and Finance Committee voted 2-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 5/12/20. This measure may be finally considered this evening. I'll entertain
Motion to
a motion.
approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second to approve. Any discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Its motion passes. So next is order FY 20054, transfer order prior year bill. At their meeting held on May 11th, 2020, the Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval. The Budget and Finance Committee voted 2-0 to recommend approval at their meeting held on 5/12/20. This measure may be finally considered this evening. This does require a roll call vote and does require 2/3 present and voting of the council. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Next item, we're acting under Resolution FY 20009, a resolution aiding and supporting the reopening of businesses closed by executive and public health orders. This measure was not referred to any committee per section XV 111 of the council rules and procedures. 14 days has elapsed. Therefore, this measure may be finally considered this evening. This does require a roll call vote. I'll entertain a motion to approve it.
Second. I'll make the motion.
Any second?
Second.
Second.
There's a second. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
There's no old business under M. We have new business. We have a bunch of orders to refer out. Order FY 20056, affix the town clerk's salary.
Mr. President, is it
Yes.
appropriate to do these in A, B, and then all C through I, so 3 motions?
I'd love to see that.
Okay, I'd make a motion to refer to order FY 20056, affix town clerk's salary to the Budget and Finance Committees.
Second.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion, there's a second. Any discussion on the motion? This does require a roll call vote to refer out.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
yes,
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
And order FY 20057, town council acceptance of electronic signatures by municipal boards recording standard.
Motion to refer to the Rules and Procedures Committee.
Second.
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 There's a motion and a second to refer this out to the Rules and Procedures Committee. Any discussion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
yes,
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Okay, the next 7 items are FY 21 budget orders, which is order FY 21001 through FY 21007. I'll entertain a motion to refer all these orders to the Budget and Finance Committees.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? Council Fitzgibbons.
I'd just like to hear the town manager's message on this, and then I'm ready to vote. I just want to hear his perspective, given where we are in the world today.
So I think I mentioned at last meeting, this is a completely new area for us. It's for all of us, you know, worldwide. So we are moving into FY 21 with what I described the other day as quicksand for revenue calculations. Because of that, we've developed a budget that relies extremely heavily on our stabilization fund, our savings account, to the tune right now of $1.5 million. That $1.5 million maintains, well, including other parts of the budget, maintain all our current staff levels, maintains the work that we are currently doing. We don't have any new, significantly new work programs in place. It essentially funds the bare minimum. So that really is the message. We have incorporated into this budget a 2.9% increase for the school district's 2021 budget. That was based upon a lot of conversations we had last fall. We have continued those conversations amongst the superintendent, myself, Rainham officials. So we don't know if we'll be able to meet that 2.9. It depends in large part on Rainham. However, that's the commitment we made. That may not even get to the school to a level playing field. They don't know what their Chapter 70 monies are going to be. We don't know what our municipal aid figures are going to be. So, as I mentioned, a lot of this is built on some very broad assumptions about the revenues. We have, fairly solid revenue, and we have a high confidence in some of the revenues. In other revenues, we have little or no confidence at this point. That may change within the next several weeks, and I'm certain it will to some extent. But for right now, to get something in the process so that we have a budget ready to go by July 1st, that is why we have these orders in front of you. So that's very basically what the budget is. We will do a lot of refining as we go along before your second June meeting, at which I anticipate a vote. But that's where we stand right now.
Councilor Fitzgibbons?
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. I just wanted everyone to have a broad overview of what we had. Obviously, we're going to dig into the details on the Budget and Finance Committee and the Finance Committee and do our due diligence on understanding where everything is. But everyone needs to hear it initially as to what the thought process was. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And also, we were all sent a copy of the budget today or last night. So I would encourage all of you to take some time to read through it. There will be at least a couple of joint meetings with the Budget and Finance Committee for discussion. We're welcome to send us questions you might have if you feel like it. But on June 23rd, there will be a full hearing on the budget, a full presentation on the budget, revenue and expense to the council. So ask your questions whenever on that day or before, whatever. We'll see where it goes. This does require a roll call vote.
And this is on all of the orders, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch?
Yes.
Mr. Rushton?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
Mr. George?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Would also ask the town clerk to schedule a public hearing on the FY21 budget for June 23rd. I don't know, 7:15? Does that sound good? 7:15?
I'll pick a time once we get closer to the meeting date so that we make sure that any orders that need to be adopted before that get
Okay.
done.
Very good. Okay.
Thank you.
But we'll have the budget hearing on June 23rd. And hopefully we'll have a vote to adopt a fiscal 21 budget. Okay, citizens' comments. Are there any citizens here that wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Any citizens at all wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? I can't see any hands unless the council clerk can, so no. Seeing none, I will move on to,
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I think Mr. Akins has a
okay,
comment.
very
His
good.
hand is up.
Go right ahead, Mr. Akins.
Yeah, in the last meeting, you guys voted to reduce the number of hours of the town elections when it's going to be later on in June. And now the governor has released some of the restrictions on the COVID-19. And I'm concerned because people can be disenfranchised by having a reduced number of hours. And a lot of people don't feel comfortable remotely or absentee ballots. So they want to vote in person. So should that be revisited, and should it be, because the COVID-19 restrictions have been reduced, that there's no longer a need to reduce those hours?
Is there any other citizen that wishes to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Any other citizen? Mr. Fitzgibbons, I don't know why I saw your light come on. Any other citizens wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Seeing none, I'll I'll go to council comments. I'll start with Councilor Souza.
First of all, I want to thank all the first responders for the outstanding job they're doing. And secondly, I'd like to thank those people who put up the flags and the banners all over town, downtown especially. I was down here today. Takes a lot of effort and time, and I really appreciate them. Thank you.
Councilor Chase, I don't want to forget you this week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I would just like to note and call attention to the members of the class of 2020 and to commend them and their families on their accomplishments and to celebrate their success with them in a virtual sense. I'm sure it's not as satisfying an event without having, owing to social distancing, but nonetheless, it's extremely significant for them. It's really very significant for all of us as a town, as a community, and I just think that their accomplishments should be duly noted.
Councilor Lindy.
Well, I can't top that one. I think he did a great job in expressing my sentiments too, but I want to thank you, Council President Gallagher, for the opportunity to gather, even if it's for 3 to 5 minutes on Memorial Day. I think it's really important. My father was a World War II veteran, and I have never missed a ceremony. I used to bring my kids when I lived elsewhere, but I was so looking forward to this year's celebration. I understand why we can't do it, but at least we can do something. Thank you.
Councilor George.
Thank you. So just a couple things. I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone. We've already heard it from the town manager. You know, we always have a very difficult budget process. This year is going to be quite difficult for a multitude of reasons that are out of our control. I think what I've seen so far has been very well thought out, still needs some work here and there. But I think everyone involved, both from town government to residents, are really going to hopefully understand some of the things that are going to be impacted in order for us to be able to keep a level of services from a town-wide and a district-wide that still keeps Bridgewater a great community to live and work in. I think everyone involved is not overly enthused to look at some of these numbers. I know that we're fortunate enough through work that has been done over the years to be able to have some reserves put into place for a rainy day. And I don't think anyone would kind of argue that point per se, that we're in a rainy day, but also with the expectation that we do have access to some of the resources that other communities are getting, you know, at the state level and the federal level regarding the things that we have incurred. I know that some of it's going to be a difficult process to probably put into specific dollars and cents, but I think we need to make everyone, specifically at the State House, aware of some of the unique challenges that we have, that I would hope we get some accommodations in regard to accessing either funds or resources to help offset the things that we're expected to service. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but it does, in my opinion, put an undue burden on our infrastructure in our town that we've always brought to light the fact that we feel we should get more for hosting those, as well as the things that are going on today. So, you know, I know that the town manager and his staff are working hard at it. I would love for citizens at every opportunity to tell our leadership in the State House, our state rep, our state senator, to be the voice of Bridgewater, to make sure that, in fact, we do get the things that I think we deserve, that's going to help the community in the long run as well. The other thing I just want to bring as an observation is, so we had a resolution that I was 100% in favor of. I do have to say I was incredibly surprised that there wasn't more discussion like the resolution we had in regards to the Plymouth County Commissioners and the sheriff. I thought today's resolution was in the same spirit, yet the resolution for the county commissioners was defeated. With, just general comments saying it wasn't really our place to get involved in that, even though we are a member of the Plymouth County Commissioner, and in the budget, we pay a pretty fair share to the commission as well. So hopefully we kind of change our mindset in future resolutions if we find ourselves in the same situation, that we do voice concerns and expectations of people that should be servicing Bridgewater and I'll say the county to be able to do things as well. Thank you very much.
Councilor Rushton.
Thank you. I just have a brief comment. Just wanted to mention I hadn't been downtown in about a week or so, and coming through the center and seeing the flags and the banners up, I want to echo Council Souza's comments. In particular, the CERT team members who come to assistance of the town on not just putting up this, but on many of the town events. Dave Moore and the Veterans Agent, retired Chief Roddy Walsh, and the many other volunteers that helped to make that happen. It's really nice to see that despite what's going on, they found the time and energy to get that done. And just one other brief comment, it is National EMS Week, and I observed today on Facebook, the fire department posting the story of a young man that was hit a while back up on 18 and High Street on his motorcycle. And so I just wanted to thank, I think a lot of times people might not be aware of the level of service that we have with our fire department. They're not EMTs, they're paramedics, and they get accolades all the time for the life-saving measures that they're making in the field. And it really makes a difference. When you have to call 911, that in Bridgewater, we're getting experienced paramedics that have some of the best training and equipment anywhere in southeastern Massachusetts. And if you have a moment, just take a time maybe to say thank you on their Facebook page and check out that brief story of the young man who's essentially is alive today due to the quick care that was provided by the Bridgewater firefighters and paramedics that showed up to that accident. So I just want to mention that, given National EMS Week, and with that, everybody have a great week.
Councilor Loesch.
Nothing tonight.
Councilor Columbotus. Is he still here?
I am. Nothing tonight.
Councilor Fitzgibbons.
Yes, first of all, Councilor Gallagher, thank you very much for running another good Zoom meeting. This is got to be really challenging to do, as running the meeting as a chair, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Secondly, thank you for listening to me when I said I didn't think that it was appropriate for the town not to do something, especially us as the town council, as the leaders of the town. I don't want anyone to show up at the common except the 9 of us or whoever can make it. But I think it's appropriate to do so, memorialize it, and be able to say, yes, we honored these people. It's very, very appropriate to do that, even in the age of social distancing. And believe me, I'll social distance from all of you. And finally, I just want to touch on what Mr. Aiken said in his public comments at the end of the meeting. Here's a perfect example of what the town manager could take from his hearing of the meeting and bring back to the town manager's report the next time we meet around what can be done about election hours. I can't answer that question right now, but it can be addressed because maybe other people have this issue. It can be addressed in full in the town manager's report at the next meeting we have. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll end the night by just a couple of comments tonight. I want to remind everybody that on Friday, May 29th, there will be a virtual BR graduation live on Channel 9 and Channel 98, beginning at 6 o'clock p.m. for our BR High School class of 2020. It'll also be re-aired throughout that weekend, May 30th and June 1st from time to time, but it'll be a virtual BR graduation live unless you can get in there somehow, but that'll be aired on Channel 9 and Channel 98 Friday, May 29th at 6 p.m. And I want to congratulate all the BR students that are graduating this year. I will let my colleagues know I did tape a 55-second message to the class of 2020. That'll be in a collage of messages from many people throughout the town. I believe I was not thrown on the editor's floor. I believe I made it in the video. So I have a 55-second message to the class of 2020 they'll see. Also, I'm sure the university has a graduation coming up. Don't know when that is or what the details are, but I certainly congratulate everybody from Bridgewater State University that's receiving their degrees this spring. And as has been mentioned in the beginning of the meeting and mentioned by several of my colleagues, Memorial Day is Monday, May 25th. We will gather, for those that can make it, at 10 o'clock on the Common, just the counselors, for somewhat of an officially unofficial remembrance of those. It's unfortunate that we can't have an official Memorial Day service this year. Again, I'm not a historian, but I can't think of any other time in the town's history or any town's history where a Memorial Day service was postponed or canceled under this type of circumstance. And I also ask all the citizens of the town that whatever you do that day, to take a little bit of time to sit down and thank those that have given the ultimate sacrifice through all the wars and battles that this country has fought for. Also, this coming weekend before Monday, BTV will also be airing clips of past Memorial Day presentations or services on the Common. And they will also be doing a digital presentation on the Hometown Heroes banners that are also being hung throughout the town. So I hope people have an opportunity to see that. We do not have an executive session this evening. Our next meeting is not until June 2nd at 7 p.m. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
There is a motion and there is a second. This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Lindy,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Thank you all.
See you later.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
all.
Take care. Good night, all.
See you Monday.